When Sarah learned that she had inherited her aunt's business, it felt like a dream come true. Growing up, she had always admired her aunt for her resilience and the way she ran her small yet thriving boutique. It wasn't just any business. It was a staple in their small town, a place where people came for unique items and a warm, welcoming atmosphere. Sarah had always loved visiting her aunt and had dreamed of one day running the shop herself. So when her aunt passed away unexpectedly, the inheritance felt like a bittersweet blessing. At first, Sarah was excited. She had always been independent and hardworking, and she thought this would be her chance to make a real impact in the community. She moved to the town with hopes of carrying on her aunt's legacy. When she walked into the boutique for the first time as its new owner, the place felt like home, familiar, cozy, and full of memories. She could already imagine herself transforming it, maybe making a few small changes, but always staying true to the essence of what her aunt had created. But as soon as she set foot into the store, she felt a chill. There was a tension in the air, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The employees, a small group of people who had worked at the shop for years, gave her polite but distant greetings. She noticed their cautious glances, as though they were unsure of what to make of her. But it was the manager, Peter, who left the biggest impression on her. Peter had been working at the store for as long as Sarah could remember. Her aunt had always spoken highly of him, claiming that he was reliable and trustworthy. But from the moment they met, Sarah could tell something was off about him. He was polite, of course, but there was a coldness in his eyes, a kind of unspoken judgment. He had been the one to run the store in her aunt's absence, and as Sarah started to settle in, she began to notice strange things about him. Peter seemed to have no real interest in getting to know her. He rarely asked about her plans for the business, and barely acknowledged the changes she wanted to make. Instead, he would always offer advice that felt more like criticism. "You're new here," he'd say, "so maybe stick to what's worked. It's better that way." Every time Sarah suggested something different, he'd brush it off with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Over time, the coldness turned into something more overt. Sarah realized that Peter wasn't just being distant. He was actively undermining her. He would make little snide remarks in front of employees, questioning her decisions in a way that made her look unprepared. If she suggested changing the store layout, Peter would make sarcastic comments about how customers liked things just the way they were, even though she knew there were areas for improvement. When she tried to engage the staff, he would quickly dismiss her ideas and take control of the conversation, leaving Sarah feeling invisible in her own business. One day, after a particularly frustrating meeting with him, Sarah decided to take action. She was determined to prove that she belonged there, that she was more than capable of running the business. But every time she tried to implement changes, she was met with resistance. Peter made it clear, without saying much, that he didn't think a woman of her background should be running things. Sarah couldn't put her finger on it, but there was something more insidious behind his behavior. It wasn't just about the business, it was personal. Despite the challenges, Sarah pressed on. She spent long hours getting to know the employees, understanding the store's operations, and learning the ins and outs of the business. She was determined not to let anyone push her out, especially not Peter. She knew that running this business wasn't just about maintaining a legacy. It was about making it her own, building something that was uniquely hers. But every time she thought she was making progress, Peter would find a way to sabotage her efforts. The tension continued to build until one fateful afternoon when it all came to a head. Sarah had just finished a meeting with a supplier, and as she entered the store, she overheard a conversation between Peter and one of the employees. They didn't realize she was nearby, but Sarah could hear every word. Peter was mocking her decisions, calling her inexperienced and saying that she wasn't cut out for the job. He spoke as though she wasn't even there, like her presence didn't matter at all. Sarah felt a surge of anger, but more than that, she felt betrayed. She had trusted him, believed that he was someone who had her best interests at heart. But in that moment, She realized that Peter was not only undermining her professionally, but had no respect for her as a person. He didn't see her as the new owner of the business. He saw her as an outsider who didn't belong. That was the turning point. From that moment on, Sarah was no longer just a woman trying to run her late aunt's boutique. She was a woman determined to take control, to stand her ground, and to make sure that Peter understood that she wasn't someone he could push around. The story was just beginning. Sarah's determination grew stronger as the days went by. After overhearing Peter's conversation with one of the employees, she knew things had to change. She was no longer going to let him undermine her. She had come to this town with a mission, to honor her aunt's legacy and make the business thrive. But Peter had clearly made it his mission to make her life difficult. Sarah was aware that she couldn't let him continue to control the store from the shadows. The following week, Sarah decided to take a more hands-on approach. She started by having one-on-one conversations with the employees. She wanted to understand their perspective, find out what they thought about the business, and whether they were satisfied with the way things were being run. Most of the staff were kind and supportive, but they were also hesitant. They had been working under Peter's leadership for so long that they had become accustomed to his ways. Some of them even admitted that they were afraid to speak up because of Peter's strong influence in the store. As Sarah spoke with the employees, she made it clear that she wanted to create a welcoming environment, a place where everyone could feel comfortable sharing their ideas and suggestions. But she knew she needed to be cautious. She didn't want to alienate anyone or make them feel as though they had to choose sides. Her goal was to gain their trust, to show them that she wasn't like Peter. She was ready to listen, and she was ready to take action. One of the employees, Emily, took Sarah aside one afternoon after the store had quieted down. Emily had been working at the boutique for several years and had seen firsthand how Peter treated the new owner. "I don't know how to say this, but you deserve to know the truth," Emily began. "Peter's been trying to push you out ever since you took over. He's been telling people that you won't last here. He thinks he should be running the store, not you." Sarah listened quietly, her anger rising. She had suspected something like this, but hearing it from one of her own employees confirmed her worst fears. She wasn't just facing a challenge from Peter's indifference. She was facing someone who was actively working against her, trying to take her position away from her. Emily continued, her voice lowered. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to get involved. But it's not fair to you. You're doing your best, and he's making it harder for you." It was clear to Sarah that Peter had been manipulating the staff, making them feel as though he was the one in charge. She knew she had to change this dynamic, and she had to do it quickly. But she didn't want to do it in a way that would create conflict or division. She needed a strategy. That evening, Sarah sat in her office, going over the business's books, thinking about her next move. She had always been a problem solver, someone who found a way to tackle obstacles head-on. But Peter was a challenge he hadn't anticipated. He wasn't just being rude or dismissive. He was actively working to sabotage her. This wasn't just a personal vendetta. It was a deliberate attempt to take control of the business. As Sarah sat at her desk, she realized she had been playing it too safe. She had been trying to accommodate Peter, hoping he would warm up to her and accept her as the new owner. But it was clear now that he wasn't going to change. It was time for Sarah to take matters into her own hands. She began brainstorming ways to shift the power balance in the store, but she knew that rushing into anything would be a mistake. She needed to be strategic, patient, and calculated. The next few days were crucial. Sarah began to put her plan into action. She started by taking small but deliberate steps to improve the store's atmosphere. She redecorated parts of the boutique, adding a fresh coat of paint, new displays, and a few more personal touches. She wanted the store to reflect her vision, not Peter's. She knew that these changes, though minor, would signal to the staff and customers that she was in control. She also began reaching out to some of the regular customers, asking for their feedback on the store. Most of them had known her aunt and were excited to see what Sarah would bring to the business. They were supportive of her ideas, which gave her the confidence she needed to continue. At the same time, She started talking to some of the more senior employees, including those who had been with the business for a long time. She made sure they knew she valued their experience and wanted to hear their opinions. But Sarah also made it clear that things were going to change. She wasn't going to let Peter continue running the store from behind the scenes. She was the one in charge now. But despite all of her efforts, Peter didn't back off. He continued to challenge Sarah at every turn, trying to undermine her decisions, dismissing her authority, and questioning her every move. He even tried to sabotage her improvements, suggesting that they were too drastic or too risky. Sarah could feel the pressure mounting, but she refused to back down. She knew that this was a test, and she wasn't going to let Peter win. In her heart, Sarah knew that she had to do something more to gain the respect of both the employees and the community. She couldn't just rely on small changes and good intentions. The time for playing nice was over. It was time to show Peter that she was not only capable of running this business, but that she was willing to fight for it. The tension between Sarah and Peter had been building for weeks, and it was beginning to take its toll on her. She had always prided herself on staying calm and composed, but Peter's constant undermining had started to wear her down. Every day, he found new ways to belittle her ideas, dismiss her decisions, and make her feel like she didn't belong. It wasn't just his actions that bothered her. It was the way he made her feel small and incapable, as though she wasn't fit to run the business she had inherited. Sarah had tried everything she could think of to turn things around. She had been patient, understanding, and proactive. She had made changes to improve the store, built relationships with the staff, and even made an effort to reach out to loyal customers. But no matter how hard she worked, Peter's resistance never stopped. He always found a way to derail her progress, and it seemed like he had no interest in working with her, only against her. But it wasn't just Peter's actions that were starting to frustrate Sarah. It was the fact that, deep down, she felt like an outsider. She had always believed that she could fit in and make a difference in the town, but Peter's behavior made her question whether she truly belonged. She had inherited the business, yes, but it felt as though she was constantly fighting an uphill battle. The employees, some of whom had been loyal to her aunt for years, seemed hesitant to fully embrace her leadership. They were stuck in the old ways, unsure of how to respond to someone new, someone different. The tipping point came one afternoon when Sarah was sitting in her office, reviewing some paperwork. The store had been quieter than usual that day, and she was trying to catch up on some of the backlog tasks. That's when she overheard another conversation between Peter and one of the employees. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but Sarah could hear every word as if it were being said directly to her. Peter was telling the employee that he didn't think Sarah was fit to run the business. He implied that she was too inexperienced, too unfamiliar with the challenges of running a store, and that she would never succeed. It felt like a punch to the stomach. All the frustration and anger Sarah had been holding in came rushing to the surface. She had heard enough. In that moment, she realized that Peter's actions weren't just petty. They were personal. He wasn't just trying to run the store his way. He was actively trying to push her out, to take over the business that had been entrusted to her. Sarah sat there for a moment, stunned. She had always tried to believe that things would improve, that Peter would come around and see that she was capable. But now she understood that he had no intention of giving her a chance. He saw her as a threat, someone who didn't belong, and he was doing everything he could to prove that she wasn't fit for the job. But Sarah wasn't the type to back down. She wasn't going to let Peter push her out of her own business. She had worked too hard to get to this point, and she wasn't about to let someone like him stand in her way. In that moment, something inside her shifted. The frustration that had been building for so long turned into determination. She had to make a decision. Let Peter continue to ruin everything she'd worked for, or take control of the situation and show him that she wasn't someone he could bully. With a deep breath, Sarah stood up from her desk and walked out of her office. She knew she needed to confront Peter. She had tried to avoid conflict, tried to take the high road, but now it was clear that there was no other option. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine while Peter tore her down behind the scenes. It was time to stand up for herself and for the business that had been passed down to her. As she walked through the store, Sarah could feel the weight of her decision. She had to be careful, not just with Peter, but with the employees who might be caught in the middle. This wasn't just about her and Peter anymore. It was about the future of the business and the people who depended on it. But Sarah was ready. She had to do this not just for herself, but for everyone who believed in her. When she reached Peter's office, she knocked on the door. There was no answer, so she opened it slowly. Peter looked up from his desk, his face betraying no emotion. He knew why she was there. "We need to talk," Sarah said, her voice steady but firm. Peter didn't respond at first. He simply stared at her, his cold gaze unwavering. For a moment, Sarah felt that familiar sense of unease creeping back in, but she pushed it aside. She couldn't let him control her anymore. She had to be strong. "I've been trying to work with you," Sarah began, "but you're making it impossible. Every time I try to make a change, you undermine me. Every time I suggest something, you shut it down. I'm not going to stand for it anymore. You've made it clear that you don't think I'm fit to run this business, but I'm telling you now, this is my store. I'm in charge, and it's time you start acting like it." Peter's expression didn't change, but Sarah could see the flicker of something in his eyes. Defensiveness, maybe, or even surprise. He had clearly underestimated her, but it didn't matter. Sarah wasn't backing down anymore. "I've worked hard to get here," she continued. "I've earned the right to lead this store, and I'm not going to let you, or anyone else, take that from me. If you can't accept that, then we have a problem. But I won't be pushed out." For a long moment, there was silence between them. Peter didn't speak, but Sarah didn't need him to. She had made her point. She had taken control, and now she was ready to move forward. That conversation marked the beginning of a new chapter for Sarah. She knew it wouldn't be easy, and she knew there would be challenges ahead. But she also knew that she was no longer going to let fear or doubt control her. She was in charge now, and she was going to make sure that everyone knew it. The conversation with Peter had been difficult, but it marked a turning point for Sarah. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she had reclaimed a sense of control. There was no turning back now. She had made it clear that she wasn't going to let him push her out of her own business, but she also knew that simply confronting him wouldn't be enough. She had to make sure her position as the owner was solidified, and that Peter, along with the rest of the staff, understood she was serious about her leadership. Over the next few days, Sarah focused on making small but impactful changes to the way the store operated. She realized that if she wanted to truly be in charge, she needed to inspire confidence in her employees. She started by addressing the staff as a whole during a meeting, where she laid out her vision for the future of the business. She acknowledged the history of the store and the work her aunt had done, but she also made it clear that she had ideas for moving forward. "I understand that things have been done a certain way for a long time," Sarah said to the group, "but this is my store now. I respect the traditions that have built this business, but we need to adapt if we want to grow. I want us to be a team, a real team. That means open communication, new ideas, and a willingness to move forward together." Her words were met with cautious nods, but she could see the employees were still unsure. Some of them had been with the business for years, and they were used to Peter's way of doing things. He had been the one who ran the shop in her aunt's absence, and now Sarah was asking them to trust someone new. Sarah knew it wouldn't be easy to earn their trust, but she was determined to prove herself. She decided to start with some changes that would be hard to ignore. She reorganized the store's layout, making it more customer-friendly and modernizing the displays. She also started to introduce new products that she felt would appeal to the store's growing customer base. These weren't drastic changes, but they were visible, and they showed that she was taking action. Throughout all of this, Sarah kept a close eye on Peter. She knew that his resistance wouldn't just vanish after their confrontation, but she was prepared for it. She had already made a list of potential strategies to handle him. She wasn't just going to fight him in the open. She was going to outsmart him. Peter's attitude didn't change overnight. He still made passive-aggressive comments about Sarah's decisions and often seemed to question her choices in front of the staff. But Sarah had expected this. What mattered now was how she responded. Instead of letting him get under her skin, she focused on her work and her vision. She made sure that every decision she made was in line with her goals for the business. She didn't let Peter distract her. One of the most important things Sarah did was to build stronger relationships with the employees who had been with the business the longest. She knew they had valuable knowledge and experience, and she wanted to make sure they felt heard. She spent time listening to their suggestions and ideas, showing them that she respected their input. In return, they began to trust her more, and some of them even started to speak up in her defense when Peter tried to undermine her. It wasn't long before Sarah started to see results. The changes she had made were having a positive impact on the store's atmosphere. The employees seemed more motivated, and the customers were responding well to the new layout and products. The store was starting to feel more vibrant, and for the first time since she had taken over, Sarah felt like the business was truly hers. But she knew that this was just the beginning. Peter's attempts to sabotage her were becoming more subtle, and Sarah realized that she had to be careful. He might not be as overt in his actions, but she could tell that he was still trying to hold on to his influence in the store. One afternoon, Sarah decided to visit a local supplier to discuss new products for the store. She wanted to make sure that she was bringing in the best items for her customers, and she knew that the supplier had a wide range of products that would fit the store's style. When she returned to the store later that day, she noticed that Peter had rearranged some of the merchandise in the front of the store, making it harder to access certain items. It was a small move, but it was a clear message. Peter was still trying to assert his control over the business. Sarah knew that she had to act fast. She couldn't let Peter sabotage her hard work, even in small ways. The next day, she called a meeting with him. She needed to address the issue directly. When Peter walked into her office, he seemed calm, but Sarah could tell he wasn't happy. "Peter," she began, her voice steady, "I noticed some changes you made to the store while I was away yesterday. It wasn't something we discussed, and it's not the direction I want the store to go in. We need to be on the same page here. If there's something you don't agree with, I need you to come to me directly." Peter's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't respond immediately. He seemed to be weighing his options, trying to decide how to handle the situation. Sarah didn't give him the chance to argue. She had already made up her mind. "I'm giving you a choice," she continued. "You can either work with me or you can leave. If you're not happy here, I'll find someone else who will be. But I'm not going to let you continue making decisions behind my back." For a moment, Peter stood silently, his hands clasped together in front of him. Finally, he spoke. "I don't think you understand what you're dealing with," he said quietly. "This business has been around for years. People are set in their ways. You'll never be able to change that." "I'm not here to change everything at once, Peter," Sarah replied. "But I'm in charge now, and I expect everyone here to respect that. You can either be part of the team or you can leave. The choice is yours." The conversation ended with no clear resolution, but Sarah knew she had made her position clear. She had laid down the law, and now it was up to Peter to decide whether he wanted to be part of the future of the business or not. Either way, Sarah wasn't backing down. She was in charge now, and she would do whatever it took to make her vision a reality. The tension in the store had shifted. Sarah could feel it in the air. After her direct conversation with Peter, things had taken on a different dynamic. The staff was watching closely, and Peter, despite his usual dismissive attitude, seemed to be taking a step back. For now. But Sarah knew this was far from over. The real test was how she could continue to lead the store and keep Peter from undermining her every step of the way. Sarah had made it clear to Peter that she wouldn't tolerate any more sabotage, but now she had to prove that she was capable of leading the business on her own terms. She knew that actions spoke louder than words, and she couldn't afford to let Peter or anyone else doubt her ability to manage the store. She spent the following days working on the store's operations and focusing on improving every little detail. It wasn't just about making big changes. It was about proving that she could handle the responsibilities of ownership and leadership. One of the first things Sarah did was improve the store's customer service. She spoke with the employees about making the shopping experience more welcoming and helpful for customers. She wanted the staff to know that they were the heart of the store, and that their positive attitude and commitment to service would help drive the success of the business. Slowly but surely, Sarah began to see a shift in the team's morale. They started to feel more engaged in the process, and their energy was beginning to match her own enthusiasm. But Sarah wasn't just focused on the inside of the store. She knew that the business needed more exposure in the community. So she began to reach out to local organizations and events to see if she could partner with them. She arranged for the store to be part of a local charity event that was coming up, knowing that it would draw in new customers and showcase the store in a positive light. She worked with her staff to prepare for the event, and their excitement was palpable. Sarah could feel that they were starting to believe in her vision, and that gave her even more determination to make sure everything went smoothly. At the same time, she continued to keep an eye on Peter. He hadn't openly rebelled since their conversation, but she couldn't be sure he had fully accepted the shift in power. Sarah knew that Peter's reluctance to work with her could still cause problems down the line. She decided that she needed to stay vigilant and continue proving to the team that she was not just a figurehead. She was the leader of the store. One afternoon, Sarah noticed that Peter had been spending more time in the back office than usual. She knew that he had been in charge of a lot of the behind-the-scenes operations, but Sarah realized that she hadn't fully taken control of this part of the business. She had been focusing so much on customer-facing tasks that she hadn't yet streamlined the internal operations as much as she wanted to. This was her chance to really make her mark and show that she could handle all aspects of the business. Sarah called Peter into her office. She needed to have another serious discussion with him. But this time, she had a plan. "Peter, I've been thinking," she began, "about how we're running the store behind the scenes. I think there are areas where we could be more efficient, especially with inventory management and ordering supplies. I want to make sure everything is running smoothly, and I'd like you to work with me on streamlining these operations." Peter's expression was unreadable, but Sarah could see that he was hesitant. "We've been doing it this way for years," he said, his voice almost defensive. "It's been working fine." "I know it's worked," Sarah replied, "but I think we can do even better. I've already looked into some systems that could help us track inventory more efficiently. This isn't about changing everything overnight. It's about improving what we already have. I want us to be prepared for the future, Peter." Peter didn't respond immediately, but Sarah could see the wheels turning in his head. It was clear that he didn't want to admit it, but he knew that she had a point. If they were going to continue growing, they needed to make sure that the store's operations were as streamlined as possible. Eventually, he reluctantly agreed to start looking into the new system with her. Sarah knew this was a small victory, but it was important. She wasn't trying to force Peter out. She was trying to work with him, on her terms. She wanted to show him that her leadership wasn't about tearing everything down but improving it. If she could get Peter to work with her, even just on these smaller tasks, it would show the entire team that she wasn't just making empty threats. She was in control, and she had a vision for the store's future. Over the next few weeks, Sarah continued to implement changes. She stayed on top of the daily operations, making sure everything was running smoothly, and she also took the time to personally connect with customers. She made it a point to greet people as they entered the store, offering assistance and asking for feedback on the products they were interested in. Sarah had always been passionate about customer service, and she wanted the store to be known for its warm and welcoming atmosphere. The event she had organized turned out to be a huge success. The store's participation in the charity event brought in a lot of new customers, and the staff's enthusiasm was evident. They had worked together as a team, and it paid off. Sarah received compliments from several attendees, and it was clear that the community was starting to recognize her as the owner who was committed to making the business thrive. But even as Sarah celebrated these small successes, she knew that Peter's role in the store was still a point of contention. She couldn't afford to get complacent, not with the way he had been acting. She was determined to keep pushing forward and ensure that the store's operations were solid, the staff was happy, and that she had full control of the business. One evening, as Sarah was closing up the store, she took a moment to reflect on how far she had come. The business was growing, and the atmosphere had improved. The customers were happy, the employees were more motivated, and she had proven to herself that she was more than capable of handling the challenges of ownership. But she knew that the biggest challenge was yet to come. She would have to continue pushing Peter to either get on board with her vision or leave, once and for all. And no matter what happened, Sarah was ready to face whatever came next. The weeks following Sarah's efforts to improve the store felt like a series of small but meaningful victories. The employees were beginning to see the value in her changes, and the customers were responding positively. The charity event had brought in a fresh wave of business, and the store was starting to feel like it was truly hers. Despite all of the progress she had made, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was still a looming shadow in the form of Peter. He hadn't caused any major disruptions in the past few weeks, but Sarah knew that his resistance wasn't completely gone. She could feel it in the way he interacted with her and the staff. His subtle dismissals, the way he often questioned her decisions in a quiet, indirect way. It was clear that he hadn't fully accepted the changes she was trying to make. She needed to do something to ensure that Peter's quiet undermining wouldn't continue to hold her back. One morning, as Sarah was going over the store's financials, she received a call from a supplier she had recently begun working with. They had an exciting new shipment of products, including exclusive items that she knew would be a hit with their customers. The products weren't cheap, but Sarah knew that investing in quality items was an important step toward establishing her store's identity. This was the kind of decision that could elevate the business, and she was determined to go ahead with it. However, as Sarah was preparing the order, Peter approached her in the store's back office. "I've been looking at some of the things you've been ordering," he said, his tone cool. "We're already on a tight budget. Are you sure we should be spending so much on these new products? We don't want to overextend ourselves." Sarah could sense the disapproval in his words. He didn't like the direction she was taking, but this was a decision she felt was necessary for the store's growth. She took a deep breath and turned to face him. "I've already considered the budget, Peter," she replied, keeping her voice calm but firm. "These items are a long-term investment. They'll attract a higher-end customer base and help us build a reputation for quality. We're not going to grow by playing it safe. We need to take calculated risks to stand out." Peter didn't respond immediately. His expression was unreadable, but Sarah could see that he wasn't convinced. There was a moment of silence before he spoke again. "I just think we need to be cautious," he said, his voice softer now. "We don't know how the market will respond to these changes. Maybe we should stick to what we know works." "I understand your concern, Peter," Sarah said, her voice steady, "but we're already doing well. This is about taking the next step. We can't afford to stay stagnant. I've made my decision, and we're moving forward with it." Peter didn't push the issue further, but Sarah could tell he wasn't happy. She felt the weight of the situation, knowing that this decision might cause further tension between them. However, she knew it was the right choice. The business needed to grow, and she wasn't going to let anyone, including Peter, stand in the way of that. As the days went on, Sarah continued to make her presence known more and more. She became more involved in every aspect of the store, from the layout to the products to the overall atmosphere. She began to hold regular meetings with the staff, discussing the store's progress and asking for their input. These meetings weren't just about business. They were about creating a culture of collaboration and transparency. Sarah wanted the employees to feel like they had a stake in the store's success, and little by little, they began to buy into her vision. But Peter's behavior didn't change. He continued to act distant and aloof, and his subtle undermining didn't go unnoticed by the rest of the staff. Sarah could see the quiet tension in the way the employees looked at Peter. Some of them still respected him, but they were starting to see his true nature. His reluctance to fully embrace the changes Sarah was making was becoming more apparent, and it was starting to have an impact on the team. One day, after another meeting where Sarah had made a series of changes to the store's inventory, Peter approached her once again. This time, he didn't even try to hide his frustration. "I've been thinking about this a lot, Sarah," he said, his voice tight. "Maybe it's time for me to move on. You've made it clear that you want to run things your way, and I'm not sure I fit into that anymore." For a moment, Sarah was taken aback. She had anticipated that Peter might be unhappy with the changes, but hearing him say it out loud made it feel real. She looked at him, trying to gauge his sincerity. Was he really ready to leave, or was this just another attempt to manipulate her into giving him more control? "I'm not asking you to leave, Peter," Sarah replied calmly. "But if you can't accept my leadership, then we'll need to find a way to move forward. I'm not going to compromise on the direction I'm taking the store. If that means we need to part ways, then so be it." Peter didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched between them, and Sarah could feel the weight of the conversation. She had made it clear that she wasn't going to back down, but she also didn't want to force anyone out. She valued the experience that Peter brought to the table, but she knew that if he wasn't willing to respect her leadership, it would only hurt the business in the long run. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Peter spoke again. "I don't know if I'm ready to go yet," he said quietly, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "But I'll think about it." Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath. She knew that this wasn't the end of the story. It was just another chapter in the long process of asserting her authority. She wasn't sure what Peter would decide, but she wasn't going to let his indecision hold her back. The store was moving forward, and Sarah was determined to make it a success. Whether Peter was on board or not, the weeks after Peter's conversation with Sarah were tense. He hadn't made any moves to leave, and Sarah could tell that he was still wrestling with his feelings about her leadership. He hadn't been as openly defiant as before, but his subtle resistance remained. Every time she implemented a change or made a decision, she could feel the weight of his disapproval. It was like walking on eggshells, trying to balance the progress she was making with the tension that hung in the air. Sarah knew that she couldn't continue like this. She had already proven to herself and the staff that she could lead, but Peter's lingering presence was a constant reminder of the challenges she still faced. She couldn't allow him to quietly undermine everything she was building. At the same time, she wasn't about to let their relationship deteriorate into a battle. She still hoped that Peter would come around and respect her as the new owner, but it was clear that something needed to change. One afternoon, as Sarah was preparing for another meeting with the staff, she overheard a conversation between Peter and one of the newer employees. They were talking in low voices, but Sarah could catch a few words. It was clear that Peter was subtly planting doubts in the employee's mind about Sarah's ability to lead. He was making comments about how things had changed too quickly, and that the store was losing its charm under her leadership. Sarah's heart sank. She had heard enough to know that Peter was still trying to convince others that she wasn't the right person to run the store. It was one thing for him to hold private doubts, but for him to spread those doubts among the team was something entirely different. She realized then that she could no longer wait for Peter to come to a decision. She had to confront him once and for all, even if it meant making a difficult choice. That evening, after the store had closed for the day, Sarah called Peter into her office. The door clicked shut behind him, and for the first time in a long while, there was no hesitation in Sarah's actions. She wasn't going to let the tension between them fester any longer. "Peter," she said, her voice steady but firm, "we need to talk." Peter, as usual, avoided her gaze. He leaned against the desk, his arms crossed over his chest. Sarah could feel the tension in the room, but she wasn't going to back down this time. She had worked too hard to get where she was, and she wasn't about to let Peter's doubts continue to create division among the staff. "I've been hearing things, Peter," Sarah said, her tone calm but with an edge of resolve. "I know you've been talking to the employees, and I've heard that you're spreading doubts about my ability to lead this store." Peter shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't say anything. Sarah pressed on. "I've been patient with you," she continued, "and I've tried to make this work, but I'm not going to let you undermine me or the progress we've made here. This is my business now, and it's time for you to decide whether you're on board with that or not." There was a long pause. Sarah could see that Peter was wrestling with his thoughts, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for the right words. Finally, he spoke, though his voice was quieter than usual. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble," Peter said, his voice somewhat defensive. "I just don't think you understand how much tradition there is here. People have been coming to this store for years, and the changes you've been making, they're too much, too fast." Sarah shook her head, refusing to let him dismiss her vision so easily. "I understand more than you think, Peter. I'm not changing everything overnight. But if we don't adapt, we'll get left behind. I've been listening to the customers, and I know what they want. They want more variety. They want a modern shopping experience. They want to see the store grow." Peter's eyes hardened at her words, but Sarah didn't flinch. She had made up her mind. "I can't keep going on like this," Sarah said, her voice firm and clear. "If you can't support me, then we need to part ways. I've given you the chance to adjust, but you've been spreading negativity instead of helping us move forward." The silence that followed was heavy. Sarah could feel the weight of the decision hanging in the air. She had given Peter every opportunity to embrace her leadership, but now it was clear that he wasn't willing to change. The store needed someone who was committed to its future, and Sarah couldn't afford to keep holding on to someone who wasn't on the same page. Finally, Peter broke the silence, his voice low. "I never wanted to cause problems, but I guess I've been struggling with all these changes. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this anymore." Sarah nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. "I understand, Peter. It's not easy to accept change. But I'm not going to stand in your way if you feel like this isn't where you belong anymore." The room felt quieter than ever, and for a moment, it seemed as though everything had come to a standstill. Then, Peter slowly stood up from the desk. "I think it's time for me to go," he said, his voice tinged with resignation. "I've been here a long time, but maybe it's time for both of us to move forward." Sarah felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and even a bit of regret. Peter had been a part of the store for so long, and while his departure would be a victory in terms of leadership, it also marked the end of an era. She had hoped it wouldn't come to this, but she knew that it was the only way for the business to thrive. "I wish you the best, Peter," Sarah said, her voice softening. "I hope you find what you're looking for." Peter didn't respond. He simply nodded and turned to leave, the door closing behind him with a quiet thud. As Sarah sat back in her chair, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She had made the hard decision, and now the store could move forward without the tension that had been holding it back. It wasn't the easiest path, but it was the right one. She had proven to herself that she could make the tough calls, and now, more than ever, she was ready to lead the business into the future. The next chapter had begun, and Sarah was more determined than ever to make it a success. Sarah sat at her desk for a long moment, letting the silence of the store sink in. The decision to part ways with Peter had been difficult, but she knew it was necessary for her to truly take ownership of the business. The weight of responsibility was still heavy on her shoulders, but as she looked around the store, something felt different, lighter, almost. Without Peter's constant resistance hanging over her, she finally felt like she could breathe. The employees had noticed the change too. There was a quiet sense of relief in the air, as though they could finally move forward without the underlying tension that had been present for so long. Sarah had always known that leadership was about more than just making decisions. It was about creating an environment where everyone felt empowered and motivated. And now, with Peter gone, she could finally build that kind of environment. Over the next few days, Sarah continued to focus on strengthening her connection with the team. She knew that in order to move forward, she had to ensure that everyone was on the same page. She called another meeting with the employees to discuss the future of the store and how they would all be part of its growth. Sarah wanted to hear from them, not just about the changes she had made, but about what they thought could be improved or added. "Your input is just as important as mine," Sarah said to the group, her tone sincere. "This store is a reflection of all of us, and I want us to work together as a team. We've been through a lot recently, but now it's time to look ahead." The employees responded positively. It wasn't just about the products or the store layout. It was about creating a space where everyone felt like their voice mattered. Sarah could see that they were beginning to trust her more, and with that trust came a renewed sense of excitement and enthusiasm. They were ready to work together toward a common goal, and that was exactly what Sarah needed. The next challenge was to make sure the changes she had implemented would continue to bear fruit. She'd already seen the positive impact of the charity event and the changes to the store's layout, but she needed to keep the momentum going. She spent hours researching new product lines, reaching out to suppliers, and building relationships with local businesses to help support the store. Sarah knew that if the store was going to thrive, it had to be a part of the community. She also made sure to stay involved in the day-to-day operations. Sarah would spend time on the sales floor, interacting with customers, answering questions, and even suggesting items they might like. She wasn't just the owner. She was the face of the store. It was important to her that customers felt comfortable and welcomed, just as they had when her aunt ran the business. Sarah was committed to maintaining that atmosphere while still pushing for growth and innovation. The employees, seeing her dedication, started to step up even more. They worked harder to ensure that every aspect of the store ran smoothly. The sense of teamwork had been growing steadily, and now it was more than just words. It was action. Sarah made sure to acknowledge their efforts, regularly praising their work and showing appreciation for their hard work. This wasn't just her success, it was theirs as well. But as the weeks passed, Sarah knew there would be challenges ahead. Leading a business wasn't easy, and there would always be obstacles to overcome. What mattered now was that she had taken control of the situation, made the necessary changes, and built a strong foundation for the store's future. Sarah had proven that she could handle the tough decisions, even when it meant making sacrifices. The store's reputation began to grow. More and more customers came in, drawn not just by the products but by the energy that Sarah had created. Word of mouth spread, and soon, the boutique was becoming a well-known spot in the community. People loved the new items, the atmosphere, and the personal touch that Sarah brought to every interaction. As the store continued to flourish, Sarah's confidence grew. She had faced challenges, pushed through difficult times, and come out stronger on the other side. The business was no longer just a place where she worked. It was her vision, her dream, and a reflection of the changes she had fought so hard to make. One afternoon, as Sarah was walking through the store, she stopped for a moment to take it all in. The employees were smiling and laughing, the customers were browsing the new products, and the store felt alive with energy. This was what she had worked for, what she had fought for. The store had become a place of growth, not just for the business, but for the people who worked there and the customers who walked through the door. As Sarah stood there, watching everything come together, she realized just how far she had come. It hadn't been easy, but she had stayed true to her vision. And now, the store was thriving. She had built something lasting, something that reflected her passion and her hard work. And in that moment, Sarah knew that this was just the beginning. The future was bright, and she was ready for whatever came next. The journey had been long, but the reward was more than worth it. The store was finally hers, not just in name, but in spirit. And Sarah was determined to make sure it would continue to grow and thrive for years to come.